Hey, it's Manu with 22 Sound. Can Greta Van Fleet save rock? That's the question I want to talk about today. I'm going to go ahead and assume that since you clicked on this video, you know Greta Van Fleet. And I'm going to go ahead and assume that when you first heard them, you thought of Led Zeppelin, unless maybe you're young enough that you never heard of Led Zeppelin before. But in which case, you have probably now, in the meantime, checked them out, because there is no way to talk about Greta Van Fleet without talking about Led Zeppelin too. I don't think that ever happened to me in any of the conversations I had about the band, whether it was here at the record store or anywhere else, or any article I read about them, or any video that I watched. But I don't really want to go too much into whether they're a Led Zeppelin ripoff or not. I think that's pretty clear. They are, but I don't even mean that in too negative of a way. I actually personally enjoy their music. Just want to put that out there. I first kind of dismissed them as just a copy of Led Zeppelin, and was like, well, why really listen to them? I can just listen to Led Zeppelin if I want to do that. But I did go back to them, gave them another chance, and I have to say, especially the From the Fires EP, I think is absolutely great. I think Black Smoke Rising is one of my favorite rock songs of the last decade. They really are good at what they're doing. And since they are so good, and since they are actually filling arenas, that's why I was kind of wondering, hey, can they bring rock music back in a big way? Or are they just kind of a single, alone standing phenomenon right now in the music world? Well, first of all, we kind of want to think about, well, where is rock music standing right now in the mainstream? And it is really kind of bleak looking. If you look at the 100 best-selling albums of 2021 in the US, you'll see that there are no rock bands formed less than 40 years ago in there. It's bands like Queen, Fleetwood Mac, Metallica that are kind of squeezing in there with some old albums that actually made it to the top 10 100 best selling of a whole year, which is pretty impressive for them. And if you want to think of it favorably from a rock perspective, you can maybe say, hey, wow, look at that, look how timeless this music is. It's still being listened to, it's still being purchased, it's still being streamed this many years later. That is a testament to the quality of the music, and I guess it really is. But it is also kind of crazy to think that no new rock band is big enough to get really into the mainstream like that. Not even Greta Van Fleet, who we're talking about right now, but what they still have achieved a certain level of success that is impressive, even though they might have not gotten into that album sale list. But hey, they're filling arenas, and they're filling those arenas with different generations of people. It's not just old people kind of reliving their youth on a nostalgia trip. No, it's a lot of teenagers really that have only heard, I guess, of those old heroes like Led Zeppelin and so on from maybe their parents' record collection or their grandparents' record collection, or who knows. But it's definitely a new generation that didn't really grow up with rock, that was born after rock was really a big cultural force getting into them. So I wonder, will that actually spur a rock revival? Will more people get into it? So one thing is, of course, I think when we think about Greta Van Fleet and Led Zeppelin and all the things that are similar to them, or all the things that Greta Van Fleet took from them, there's one big fundamental difference, really. And I think that's something that they just can't get around. They can't do anything about it, and that is that Led Zeppelin is, or was at the time, really a progressive band. Not in the sense that they are a progressive rock band as a genre description, but they're really they were a forward-looking band. They pushed new style of music at the time, while Greta Van Fleet is really a conservative, a backward-looking band. They clearly take all their cues, their influences from decades, long time ago, and I think that is a big difference there. Led Zeppelin They were also accused of ripping old blues artists off a lot of times, sometimes even to the point that they were sued for actually stealing individual parts or even whole songs. But I doubt that anybody would have listened to that first Led Zeppelin record and thought it was like an old, undiscovered blues album from the, 20s or 30s or so. They took the cues, but they really made it their own. They made it their own sound. They were much heavier. There was a different vibe to it, especially as they progressed in their career. On their first album, there were some songs still on there that were really, really bluesy, but they had other influences, other ingredients in their sound as well, really pushing the music forward. And also they were part of kind of a bigger cultural movement at the time. When you think about when they came out, at the time it was just the sexual revolution just happened. The whole hippie era, Woodstock, was kind of like all in that same time frame. So them like writing songs about sex and free love and stuff like that. They also wrote some songs about fantasy stuff and stuff like that. There was a lot of sex in there, and I think that was at the time really kind of revolutionary. It was music for the youth. It was music geared towards people that kind of wanted to break the shackles, that wanted to distance themselves from their really conservative parents. And most parents hated Led Zeppelin. Most parents these days, well, I'm not saying most, but probably a lot of parents, they actually probably really like Greta Van Fleet. It reminds them of their own youth. So that is, I think, a very big fundamental difference. The rebellious aspect of music, that kind of differentiating yourself from things from the past, that is something that Greta can't have in the way they're making music, in the way they're emulating something from the past. Now, that is not something that hasn't done before either. I mean, think about, for instance, the Strokes. 20 years ago, that kind of garage revival that we had in the early 2000s, that was in essence really a retro thing as well. It was them kind of going back in time. I remember seeing that Last Night video. It looked like they were like on the Ed Sullivan Show or something like that. Really, everything screamed retro. The sound itself, I mean, they used old equipment, the type of song, the style of the music, but also the clothes and everything was a throwback to a time, like 40 or so years prior. So you could say there wasn't much originality really in there as well. But I think one big difference there was that they weren't really emulating one specific band. They were really more like a whole, kind of capturing the vibe of a whole era through the lens of their time and their own experience. Kind of like when you think about that 70s show, if you remember that, it was done in the 90s. That was really, in a way, it said a lot about the people in the 90s, how they were looking back at the 70s, as much as it did about the actual 70s. Or when you think about a show like Mad Men, that is, of course, set in the 60s, but it was set as people in the 2000s thought of the 60s. So that kind of still had their own take on what was going on at the time in that whole retro aspect, and it really spurred a big wave of bands that were kind of similar to the Strokes. The White Stripes, the Hives, the Black Keys, and so on. A lot of their bands. In the UK, you have bands like the Libertines, who were, of course, by far the best of all of those bands. But anyway, that's a different topic. But I think the big difference and what allowed it to become kind of a wave and not just one band getting to a certain success level is that it was more about kind of a vague era. It wasn't copying one particular band. it was kind of like that whole style, and it even had an influence on the fashion too. Of course, sometimes you don't know what influences what, but that kind of slim fitted suits, stuff like that, the leather jackets, all that stuff kind of came back in the 2000s. That was before that not so cool, so of course we can credit the Strokes for making leather jackets cool again as well, which I thought was really welcoming at the time. Leather jackets are, of course, absolutely great. But anyway, so when we think about Greta now, I think what might hinder a rock revival spurred by them is that they're just too particular to that one band. That's why I keep talking about that. It's what would be a band that comes in their wake. Is that another band that sounds like Led Zeppelin, or is it another band that sounds like another 70s rock band? We haven't really seen anything coming yet. It's not that there aren't any bands that are inspired by classic rock, but that never totally went away. We had, the Rival Sons, bands like that or so, that have been around now for a little while, and they have like a decent level of success, but they didn't really get in the teenage world, which is really what, let's be honest, pushes the pop world forward. So I kind of doubt that happens, and I think we need those big gateway bands into musical styles or into new musical movements, those that kind of break out of the underground and inspire people to listen to other stuff. But I think what probably kind of happens is, if you are a young person getting into Greta Van Fleet and kind of discovering rock for the first time, well, what's the next step? You're probably gonna listen to Led Zeppelin, and then maybe from there you start listening to other classic rock bands. So that's why I'm kind of hesitant and think it might not be the big rock revival coming from Greta Van Fleet. It might have to come from another side, from another angle. Now, one thing though that I do hope, and maybe we'll see that just in a few years, maybe it'll take some time for that to actually show, is, well, maybe they do actually inspire some people to pick up their instruments and start playing guitar, start playing drums, form bands with their friends, because that's really where every new rock revival came from, is always from garages. Just somewhere, bands coming together, getting something bred in the underground that then comes to the surface of the mainstream. And I think it would have to be something a little more original than what Greta does, but maybe at least they kind of start paving the way in that direction. I don't know. It's a big topic. We could talk about that for hours. Whether a rock revival will ever happen, whether it needs to happen, whether people even want that. I personally would love it. I love rock music. It's not the only thing I do, but I love the whole attitude about it, the vibe about it, and I would love to see a new generation taking the spirit of rock and roll and bringing that forward. And it doesn't mean it has to sound exactly like it did in prior years or prior decades, and I think that's the big difference, and why this might not be the moment yet for a big rock revival from Greta Van Fleet, or spurred by Greta Van Fleet. Well, what do you think about it? Let us know in the comments, and yeah, subscribe to our channel. You can shop our store online as well, and yeah, we're just happy to hear from you. Check out our other videos. We talk about music culture, we talk about new vinyl releases on this channel. We're building it now. It's a new store, it's a new channel, so give us your feedback, and yeah, let's see what else you want to hear about in the future. Thanks for watching.